Live.
All right, good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning, we are going to be looking further at the 3-acre storm rule and hearing from a few affected citizens with a town, and then give the Agency of Natural Resources a chance to help us understand their perspective on this. So welcome, Paige Kalita.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. First of all, I want to say I love my state. I love clean air. I love clean water. My husband and I have lived here for over 35 years. We met at UVM, and he was a soccer player on the 1989 almost championship team. So it's been an exciting year for us, but we got a letter in August of this year from the state telling us that we live in a 3-acre parcel and we are out of compliance with the stormwater permit. So needless to say, this was confusing, scary, worrisome, not something I ever thought I'd be dealing with as a homeowner. And I'd like to point out that this was not, excuse me, a law or a rule when I bought my home. So the letter, which you can see online and in front of you, is what we got in the mail. And I have put a red box around some of the areas to just sort of point out some things. The language in this that was scary to us. So, we were notified that if we didn't comply with this, there were all kinds of scary things that would happen, that we needed to submit an NOI, all language that I didn't know anything about. If you then scroll down to the third page of this, what if I don't comply? So if I don't comply, we can be subject to financial penalties, encumbrance on our properties, and scary things, in my opinion. So during this time, the neighborhood obviously started communicating and trying to figure this out. So a bunch of us have spent a lot of time, nights, weekends, select board meetings, trying to understand this. I didn't know anything about stormwater. It's not something I've ever studied or been, but I really do understand the effect of how it can affect Lake Champlain, and I am all for cleaning up Lake Champlain and having clean water. The other issue that this has created is a conflict between neighbors, between other residents in the town, between the neighborhood and the select board, the neighborhood and the town. We've had several contentious select board meetings. There's been postings on Front Porch Forum about why should I have to pay for your stormwater? And it's upsetting, to say the least. I've always felt that Vermont is a welcoming and a state where people get along for the most part. And this has really kind of pitted us against each other. The other issue is just the uncertainty that it brings. And I'll refer back to the last paragraph in the letter, encumbrance to my property. So if for some reason I have to move because of a job change or whatever, what does that mean? Can I sell my home? Do I have to put money in escrow to deal with this? What is this going to cost? There's just so many unanswered questions. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that we have about a 12% property tax increase this year. So on top of that, and the potential cost from this, we feel like we're really being taxed out of our home. I don't know if we can stay if we have to pay this. It's just not in our budget. So the next slide I would like to show you is Exhibit B. And this is an overview of Richmond. I got this from the A&R mapping tool, where you can put layers on and off that show property lines, agricultural area, highways, things like that. So if you look at this, the green area is the Southview development. That's where I live. Right below that, you can see 89. And this is all uphill. It's just a big hill. We're on the spine of the Green Mountains. So everything flows down from there, under 89, through a farm, and eventually to the Winooski River. The orange and blue and purple areas are adjoining neighborhoods. Initially, the ANR, when they sent their letter, told us that the blue, orange, and green areas all had to get this permit. To me, that, I guess, makes sense. They're neighborhoods. They should have stormwater permits. It eventually got carved down to just the pink area. So those are the only homes that have to do this. Why is this? It's really confusing to me. And as I said before, all of this area is uphill. The purple neighborhood drains into the right side of the pink area, and the orange and blue drain all down that road. The other thing to note is the green area is the Southview neighborhood. The longest road on that is Southview Drive. Now, why does just the pink homes have to do this? If you see the second slide, there's sort of a closer in a view of this, and you can sort of see how all of this area is uphill. You can see also the blue streams, which are where the water eventually drains. And if you can see, it goes under the highway, under a railroad, through farmland, past a school, which is doing a 3-acre permit, and eventually into the Winooski. Okay, Exhibit C. Make this smaller. There, okay. So this is a sort of bigger view into the Southview neighborhood. This is where I drew the pink line before. So the yellow lots have to do the permit. The green lots don't. So there are, you can see a big group of green lots on the top of this. That's the uphill area and newer, bigger homes. The yellow area is the sort of the older part of the neighborhood, smaller homes. They've been there 40 to years ago was probably when the first one was built. Then we have these sort of 3 little green areas. Those, the first 2 at the bottom are on Southview Drive. The top one on the right was built by the builder of the neighborhood. Yet those parcels don't have to be in the permit. I just don't understand it. So the explanation given to us by the ANR, if you see the second page of this, is the original hand-drawn map by the developer of the Southview neighborhood. It mostly reflects what was built, but not exactly. And that's what they've used along with a stormwater permit that was initially permitted for this neighborhood to determine who's in and who's out. Issue I have with this is if the goal is to reduce runoff, reduce phosphorus, and clean up the lake, why are we only doing part of the neighborhood? It just doesn't make sense. So we've asked the ANR about this, had a lot of conversations. And the other thing that they told us is that we have to build a system that accommodates for all of the water. So that means the yellow areas of the neighborhood have to pay for this, maintain it, do the permits, look for grants, funding, all of those things. But the green areas send us their water and they don't have to be involved in any way, financially, legally, time-wise, any of those things. The other issue, which I'm sort of pretty clear from this, is cost. We've been told, and we don't have an engineering plan that's done yet, that this could cost between $500,000 and $1 million to do this in our neighborhood. 48 homes have to pay for this. The town of Richmond will be responsible for, I believe it's like 30% of it. So that number per household is somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. It just makes me sick. Something I've learned through my education on this, and this screenshot is from public comment period on this law. I didn't know about this at the time. This was passed in 2019. The town of Richmond was notified in 2020. I wasn't able to make any public comment on this. I never received a letter. I had no knowledge of this. The first time I learned about it was August of 2024. We learned during this time, as we started to get educated on this, that the town of Richmond was addressing this issue in 2023 and had started the NOI. At a select board meeting, they went into executive session, and from what we've been told from this, a lot of information's been redacted, is that town attorney advised the town of Richmond to withdraw the NOI, because if they were the only name on it, they'd be fully responsible for the cost. And that didn't serve all of the residents of Richmond. So the town did that, they withdrew the NOI, and that ended up us in August with an expired permit out of compliance. So in the public comment period of this, there were a lot of questions asked, and this is like a 200-page document, but a real number stands out to me. The estimate is that this affects 5% of residential homeowners in the state of Vermont. So the way I interpret that is you're asking 5% of us to pay to clean up the lake. In the town of Richmond, there are 2 residential sites, and it represents 4% of the homeowners in the town of Richmond. So to conclude, what do I think? I think this is not a scientific approach to the problem. They've picked my neighborhood because it was a stormwater permit 40 years ago, before I even owned my property. So if we want to clean up the lake and we're just picking properties because 40 years ago there was a stormwater permit, it's not addressing the problem. Something that the ANR said in one of our meetings is that there are bigger neighborhoods out there with more impervious surface than mine, but they don't have to do this because they never had a stormwater permit because one wasn't required at the time the neighborhood was built. How is that fair? So my thoughts are maybe we should exclude existing developments and focus on new construction. It's much cheaper to do this when you're building a neighborhood than to try to retrofit. There's so many questions that come up for me. If we have to do this and they say a settling pond should be on your property page, do I give that land to my neighbors? Do I donate it? Do they buy it from me? Does the town buy it from me? What if my homeowner's insurance says that's liability? What if a kid drowns in that? I'm going to raise your rates. Am I compensated for the loss of that property? Am I compensated for the reduction to the value of my property? What if I want to sell my home and at the same time a home 5 away from me is for sale? They don't have this issue because they're not in the 3-acre area. Which home would you buy? So the final thought I'd like to say is we had a big meeting with the ANR. Thank you. They came and tried to explain this to us. One of the employees made a statement that has really sat with me. He said, we have an obligation to see that these requirements are met, and we know not everybody likes them, but it often is what it is. I'm sorry. It was really hard to hear that. It is what it is when I'm faced with $10,000 or $20,000 out of my pocket. The other big word from that is we. We have an obligation. Who's we? We is the state of Vermont. It's not me as an individual homeowner to pay for this for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and for joining us today. Members, if you have questions, I think for Paige will be, you'll stay with us the rest of the morning, I think. So do members have questions? Representative Tagliavia, then Austin.
With regard to, I can't remember which slide it was, but the one that shows the neighborhood you live in, plus I believe it's the uphill section of the subdivision.
This one?
How much correspondence have you had with the neighbors in the uphill
So,
section?
yeah, so initially when we got this letter, the letter was mailed to most of the green and orange and blue areas. So that's Southview, Mary Drive, and Hidden Pines. But not everybody got one. So we have sort of an email list through the neighborhood, but not everyone's on that. So emails started flying around. We've talked about it. And then the town of Richmond has been pretty supportive. They were, I would say not so in the beginning, but I think they understand our position now. They've organized select board meeting. They had a big select board meeting, moved to the library, which was like 3 hours long. People from the ANR came, explained this. We were able to ask a lot of questions. So there has been correspondence, but since the properties that have been dropped off of the 3-acre list, we're now down to just the people that are affected by this. I met a neighbor recently who's like 5 houses away from me. I saw her at something and she just said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Oh, it's stressful." And she said, "Yeah, I'm just putting my head down and just trying to get, hoping I don't get picked." I know that people in the other areas are worried this may happen to them at some point, but I understand, like, if it wasn't me, I'd just stay out of it. I will say that they don't think it's fair. But, there's been, because people not involved go to the select board meetings, there's been some chatter on Front Porch Forum about it, which is hard to read, people saying this, I shouldn't have to pay for this for you. And that's hard to hear because the goal is to clean up the lake. So they're saying I shouldn't have to pay for this, but they're asking me to.
How many how many parcels or houses are in this your area, the original?
Yeah, so the green area is about 76, but the amount of the affected homes is 48.
Representative Austin.
So just to clarify, because I'm hearing from my constituents too in Colchester about this. Is this an EPA mandate?
So we'll have more from, it's part of our TMDL, and
Mhm.
we will have more from the Agency of Natural Resources later in this morning's segment. So we'll be able to answer those questions, how it fits in with that, with them. Further questions about this? Representative Labor.
Thank you. Prior to you purchasing that property, did the town of Richmond have a zoning ordinance or a plan?
So my understanding, so this property the Southview neighborhood that I lived in was developed by a man named Westall, is his last name. One of the roads is Westall Drive. He started building, you see the right intersection where the right line goes down. First, there were 6 homes built there in like the middle of 1980s. Then he built more to the left. Then he went up to the top of the neighborhood in the non-pink area, built 12 homes. Then he built the first part of Jonah, which is the one to the right. And he went bankrupt because he apparently built a house on a lot that was the house was too close to wetland. So we had to tear the house down. So he filed bankruptcy, and the remaining like 6 lots, which is what I purchased, were sold by the bank. So I didn't buy from a developer. I bought a lot that was in bankruptcy from the bank. We hired a builder and built the house. Several more of the lots in my area were purchased by Fitzgerald. And then they built the middle section, which is the non-pink area of like 14 homes, right after me, like the next year. So I never knew anything about stormwater permits. I didn't know it was attached to my property or anything. The town has always managed them. And in fact, in a lot of these select board meetings, and when they split off Mary Drive and Hidden Pines, the orange and blue area, they are still doing their stormwater permits. They're paying for them, managing them, applying for them because they're less expensive. They're, $4,000 or something, but they won't do it for us because of the cost and the potential, the cost for the all of Richmond. And I understand that, that's not in the budget, in the Richmond budget to pay $1 million for this one neighborhood. So no, I didn't know there was a stormwater permit. We don't have an HOA. It's not something we'd ever manage. It's always been done by the town. The town plows the roads, manages the roads. They've managed the stormwater permits, and I don't know about all this, but at some point, the stormwater permit was deemed abandoned and there was this orphan program. The town took it over. It did that. They did the orphan program and there was some grant funding for that. So they've been managing it all this time. And something to say, we've had 2 major flooding events in Richmond the last 2 years, July 2023 and July 2024. So the main road coming into my neighborhood, Browns Trace Road, there was literally a river coming down it. We've never had any damage in our neighborhood. The only damage that we've had is water coming from Browns Trace Road into the neighborhood because there were block culverts and stuff. But our system as it exists works fine.
We actually, I'm sorry, we have a bunch of witnesses, so
Just one more quick.
one more question.
However, there was flood, you said caused damage. Was that responsibility of the town or a landowner?
I believe. And this is all, there's a big bridge project happening on the highway. And I think it was from that. And another side note is down below us along Route 2, the main road in Richmond, this bridge project has actually diverted a stream and caused a lot of flooding in where the mobile was, and there's a new
Bridge,
gas
public
station
bridge
there.
project.
Yes, on the highway. Yeah. And it literally is like keeps flooding this field, and the stream's actually been moved because of like earth that they've moved and runoff and all kinds of stuff. So there's been issues related to that the towns had to deal with.
So the roads in your neighborhood, public roads, town roads?
Yes. They are.
Thank you
Yes.
for your testimony. I think we may
you so
have
much.
another
You're
question.
welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We now have Bill Houston joining us via Zoom. Maybe it's Connie.
Hello, this is Bill Houston.
Hello, do you have a camera you want to use?
Oh, you got me.
All right, well, we're ready to hear your testimony.
Just do it.
Okay, well, anyway, thanks for inviting me to testify. My wife and I own a commercial industrial land on Panton Road in Virgins. The parcel of land, I believe it was like 14 acres. It's been divided into 5 lots. 2 of them are owned by us still, and 3 of them are owned by other people. They've been sold off. It's had a stormwater permit on it since 1998. There are 2 vacant lots, 2 commercial buildings, and a self-storage facility on the property. To our knowledge, there's never been any stormwater runoff issues. The system was engineered and it consists of grass-lined swales. We've got an estimate now to upgrade the system. There again, that the system was before 2002. It was built before 2002. So we have gone through engineering, have gotten some estimates on it. It looks like it's going to be over $200,000 to upgrade. I believe it's a little over 4 acres of impermeable surface. And this will supposedly bring us into compliance with the new law. Basically what's happened is it's unaffordable for the owners that now own the property. And the other thing is we don't know if the old system doesn't work. It may be just as good as what's been designed to replace it. So anyway, there's, another thing I'd like to just mention, there's in this the industrial buildings that are there, there's approximately 20 employees in 2 different buildings there. So I guess that's all I can say about that. If you would like to ask me any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Representative Tagliavia.
Have any water tests to show high phosphorus counts or any other pollutants been done on stormwater on your property to show the evidence of coming from those lands?
Not that I know of. I've talked to the state several times, but as far as I know, they've never come out and looked at it. Well, they've looked at it, I don't know. We were doing an audition 10 years ago or 8 years ago on the industrial building. They came out and said it looked great, so. But that was visual.
Got your last name, Paige. Were there any testing for the waters coming from your neighborhood as well for?
No.
Are there further questions? All right, thanks for joining us, and perhaps you can stay on the line with us while we hear from other witnesses.
Yeah, I'll be able to stay until about 10 o'clock and then I've got another appointment. But yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you.
Next up, we have Tom DiPietro.
Morning, everybody. Tom DiPietro. I'm Director of Public Works for the City of South Burlington. I've been in that position for 3 years. Prior to that, I managed the city's stormwater utility for about 16 years. And prior to that, I worked over at DEC in the Stormwater Division. So I guess what I wanted to provide today is a little bit of municipal perspective on this whole issue and sort of, I know in some ways South Burlington's a bit of an outlier because of our robust stormwater program that we've had since 2005. But we have quite a bit of experience dealing with this and trying to work with homeowners like Paige and industrial park owners like Bill to kind of resolve and come into compliance. So I've got a very brief couple of things I wanted to say, and then I thought maybe I'd open up to questions, kind of what's on your mind. So as I said, South Burlington has been in the center of all these state stormwater issues going back over 20 years now, kind of a lot of the stormwater impaired watershed issues in the state, kind of we were the epicenter of those, which drove a lot of policy. We've got about 200 state stormwater permits in the city. That's just total. We have about 47 sites in South Burlington that have over 3 acres of impervious surface on them. Of those 47, 15 do not yet have coverage under the state's 90/50 permit or the so-called 3-acre permit that you folks are talking about today. And of those 15, 2 are orphan systems. And I want to talk about those a little bit as well, because I want to make sure we're all kind of using the same term here a little bit. Those ones are especially difficult to manage, or they've proven to be for us. And there's also 3 additional sites in the city that have expired permits, but they're not 3-acre sites. These are orphan sites. So they're less than 3 acre, but they have expired permits. So very similar concerns in those areas. So I think Paige has described in her testimony orphan systems, but just generally speaking, those are neighborhoods that were built by a developer. The developer sold off all the lots, is no longer financially or legally involved with the neighborhood, right? Maybe the town has taken over the roads and has managed, road maintenance for however long. But the state stormwater permit exists for some of those areas. And Pages is a great example in Richmond because we have situations in South Burlington where part of the neighborhood was built before stormwater regulations and permits were required. So the main road in this half of the neighborhood doesn't have a permit. But on this side of the road, not inclusive of the road, they are covered under a permit and they are being asked to do more work. So it just gets a little, and you try to explain that to somebody that lives here versus their neighbor across the street, and it's really hard. to comprehend sort of why that difference and why they're being treated differently.
Say that one more time. So it's because some of them were built later and already were subject to a stormwater permit.
That's correct. So, there's a 1 acre threshold to be simple right now of impervious surface. You have to get a state permit. Those thresholds were different back decades ago. So when this, maybe before a state had a permitting program or the threshold was different, kind of this half of the area didn't have to get it. But then this was built 10 years later, stormwater regulations were in place. So now they have a state permit. So they're sort of in, right? For lack of a better term, they're part of the regulated entities. Like Agent Bill have described a little bit already.
Didn't we move to, or are moving to a half acre?
The permitting thresholds, yeah, so, I think so. I'm gonna steer away from why we have this permit, because I know Neil and Kevin are speaking after me. And I think they're better suited to answer that question. So why at the state level? I do.
Wanted to point out that we're moving to an even lower threshold.
Real quick question. That 1 acre permitting, is that what went into place in 2002? Is that why the 2002 boundary here is there?
So, I'm gonna let Kevin and Neil give you the history, but yeah, generally speaking, there's a couple different thresholds that pull you into getting a state permit or requiring a state permit. But I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the local level in South Burlington, because like I said, we've had the stormwater utility. We were the first in the state in 2005. And we have some policies in place to really try to help folks come into compliance. And they're very similar to other stormwater utilities, but in some ways they're different. So again, what we'll do to try to help folks out is we have 3 staff in our utility that deal with for the permitting, the engineering. We've also got maintenance staff, but sort of our engineering staff will go out and they'll provide some limited technical assistance to neighborhoods. When we own the roads, we pitch in part of the cost for those roads. That's a city policy decision on how we want to handle it. Again, I don't know that other municipalities have made that decision. And we'll also spend our staff time trying to get state grants and funds to try to help move these projects forward. So once we get through the engineering and the difficult conversations about what are we going to build and where we're going to build it, let's just kind of jump past those. We'll go out and we'll try to find grant funds. We'll administer those. Which is another large effort. It's a big task to ask of a homeowner association, or in the case of an orphan system, there's no association. So in one instance, our staff literally went door to door to let folks know, hey, we're trying to find a grant to help you resolve this issue. And I think some of the response they got was, wait, what issue? So it definitely created some of that neighborhood strife. Sometimes we were the messenger. We tell folks, hey, there's this issue. Our roads are part of it, right? The city roads are part of it, but it's also all of your homes. So it does set up some of those antagonistic and difficult conversations to try to move forward with solutions. But we've worked through those in some cases. Certainly grant funding that is available. It helps bring people to the table, but it doesn't solve all of the problems. As other folks have testified, these are expensive systems to build. Pre-pandemic, we've done quite a few projects. We estimated about $70,000 per impervious acre to implement solutions. Post-pandemic, that's more due to cost increases. And partially some of the, I'll quote unquote, easier projects we had ability to do prior to the pandemic. So nowadays, the cost of some of these projects is quite a bit more than $70,000 per impervious acre. And the rules change too. So some of the settling ponds, the manual, the state guidelines have changed as well. So we're implementing constructed wetlands and things like that.
Representative Paglia.
You referenced stormwater permits. The city of Burlington has stormwater permits. Is the city responsible for some of its own stormwater permits for some of the maintenance of runoff?
So South Burlington, yeah, we have our own stormwater permits. We are a co-permittee. So it's us because we own the roads. These permits run with the land. And so if you own impervious surface, you're sort of pulled in to be part of that permit. We're also an MS4 community, which is a whole different level of federally required permit and regulation that we have to comply with.
And the city itself is actually subject to fines if the city does not comply. Is that correct?
We could be, yeah. I mean, we've never been fined, but that's in the rules.
Can you explain a little bit about what an MS4 is for folks?
Yeah, so this is a federal permit program, usually based on population density. And once you're identified as being an MS4 community based on size, there's these 6 minimum measures you have to implement. It's different than the state permit program in some ways, but it's also very related, right? It's all about stormwater. So some of those minimum measures are like education, right? Doing stormwater education. Why does stormwater pollute? Best management practices, putting those in place, right? So, and there's annual reporting that goes along with that. Under each of those 6 minimum measures, there's a list of things that we have to comply with and do, and then report on an annual basis. And many of the larger communities with these stormwater impaired watersheds are MS4s, so there's the lake phosphorus TMDL, but there's also these stormwater impaired stream TMDLs that we're working to implement as well.
And I see you, Representative Pritchard, but I just want to follow up with how does MS4 interact or relate to the 3 acre?
So again, different permit programs. But I will note, so under our MS4 permit, we do have the ability to pull under state permits. So let's just say there was a permit for City Hall. I could then take that permit and sort of roll it under my MS4. And I could also do that on these other permits that we're talking about. So we could go to City Council, ask to do it. And the city has policies in place to sort of protect us from some liability there, because again, we have requirements under the phosphorus TMDL and the stormwater TMDLs, et cetera. So when we pull somebody in under those permits, we kind of get the load reductions that they're required to do as well. So the way we handle it when we pull someone in is we say, okay, you've got to upgrade your system to the current standards, right? So if there was a system out there, an older neighborhood that didn't have stormwater treatment, we say, upgrade to the current standards, and then we'll roll you under. And then at that point, the city would maintain the permitting, maintenance, all that going forward. It is a big lift to get those systems upgraded, as you're hearing, right? So it's not that we remove the need for permitting. We just offer a bit of an alternative route to permit compliance, I would say. So you can work more at the local level to organize and collaborate to get that work done.
Representative Pritchard.
Is there point source water testing as part of this plan that ultimately goes to the people to, I've heard that the water has not been tested. So how do you determine what the plan is for being compliant?
That's a great question.
And how do we know that there isn't a problem?
So back to some of the basics of how does stormwater pollute, right? I always try to explain it. It pollutes in 2 ways. One, obviously, all the stuff it picks up off parking lots and roads as it flows to a stream in the lake. All that stuff washes in. That's one way.
But don't swales filter that stuff?
They can, yeah. But also it's just erosion in streams. So when you create that extra volume, if that water is not soaking into the ground, if it's all rushing off a parking lot, it erodes stream banks. Whether that sediment's coming off a parking lot or eroding from a stream bank, it's all sediment that contains phosphorus. And those pollutants sort of roll down into the lake, right? Or flow down rather into the lake and have impacts on the streams. To the specific question of testing. So the state has treatment standards in place. Those treatment standards are developed through a rigorous engineering process. So they know that when you build a gravel wetland, you're going to get this type of removal. So there's not testing that is required as part of the state permits. It is assumed if you build the system to the standards and you size them correctly, you're going to get this amount of removal based on a lot of studies that have been done around the country.
That's a pretty expensive assumption to make for these folks in this guy.
So So I think those are great questions to ask of our state regulators too, as well, because we are a regulated entity, much like the other folks you've heard from this morning. We work constantly to maintain compliance and get ourselves and others into compliance with these regulations.
Representative Tagliavia.
I believe we heard testimony a couple of times about point source. I'm not sure if I'm remembering this correctly, but phosphorus TMDL from like sewage and stormwater runoff overflows.
Mhm.
It's like 4%. In those overflows, because of whether it be lack of funding or whatever, lack of upgrades, how much over the past 3 years has the city of Burlington paid in fines because of the excess phosphorus in Lake Champlain?
So once again, I'll correct you, Representative. I'm City of South Burlington.
Okay,
I don't know the fines Burlington has paid.
okay.
I can tell you that we don't have combined system in South Burlington, which is a benefit in one sense, but because that water is disconnected, we have a lot more water that flows to our local streams and causes erosion. And so that's sort of our challenge. It's not the CSO challenge that Burlington and other communities with CSOs have. It is the stormwater impaired streams.
So I would appreciate if you would, since you've kind of grown up with the city of South Burlington a little bit, and if you can relate to the Richmond challenge that we just heard laid out, and that the delta, if you will, between a town like the size of Richmond versus a town like city of South Burlington. And just thoughts you have. I guess I'm particularly interested in the concerns brought up around the town's liability and how that interacts.
Yeah, so I'm happy to see that you're receiving testimony from some of the residents, right, that are impacted by this, because we hear those stories at the local level all the time. People are saying, hey, this is going to cost me $10,000. I've got, car payments and kids to put in college. This is a real impact, which has certainly driven some of our policy where we do cost sharing and we go out and we try to find grants. And even despite that, it's still rather expensive. So I think to your point about how Richmond doesn't have the staff, I think just in local funds raised through stormwater utility fees this current year, we're $2.9 million in South Burlington is what we raise. So if you have a single family home, you pay about $92.16 a year. And I'm not going to get into the utility billing. But if you're a single family homeowner, that's what you're putting in, right? Within our utility budget, I think the whole budget this fiscal year is 4.2 million. So some of that's grants and other sources of income that we've got over time. I don't know what Richmond's budget is for stormwater. I don't think it's that. And like I said, I've got 3 staff, engineering level kind of folks, project managers, if you will. We've got 4 folks that do maintenance, kind of our maintenance crew in South Burlington. From a liability perspective, that's an interesting one because I think we in South Burlington have taken on a bit more liability and have been willing to take on a little bit more liability than others because of those resources that we have. But it is a tricky one. So even when we reach out to help, if we were to go get a grant, some of those grant requirements might say, well, you got to submit an NOI and get a permit. And that's somebody mentioned earlier, everybody's got to sign on to that permit. So if just the city signs on, suddenly we might be left as the permittee. And it's really not easy, but it's not hard to find us and regulate South Burlington or other municipalities in the state. So we are often there, and there's a liability concern there. There's the cost. So yes, we do collect money from everyone. At its core, utility is really just a funding mechanism. We're taking that money to maintain the city's compliance with all these regulations, and then try to help sort of our residents as well. Yeah.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about builders, that create these neighborhoods. I would assume that for them to get to create a neighborhood of 30 or 60 homes, going back 20 years, 30 years, they would need a stormwater permit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I would assume that they would have had to have installed that in these developments. So why hasn't that happened?
So I'm going to veer where I was going to let Kevin and Neil talk a bit about the state permit program, but the standards have changed over time. So some of the original stormwater permits that were issued by the state of Vermont were really about flood protection, right? So it required a pipe in, storage area for the water, and maybe a smaller pipe out or an outlet structure. Over time, we realized that, hey, we actually need to treat stormwater. We need to detain it. We need to filter it, right? So there was 2002 standards that were put in place that required a little bit more treatment to remove phosphorus, because if you're just detaining water so it doesn't flood, you're not getting the phosphorus removal that might be needed for a TMDL.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so they've evolved even more now to improve the amount of phosphorus. So now, like I said earlier, there's gravel wetlands that are required because they remove more phosphorus than, say, a pond or even a swale or, different systems.
That's a great segue to the next witness. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and help us understand this issue.
Of course, hopefully I didn't talk too fast. Thanks
Well, thank you very much.
Very
for
helpful.
inviting me.
Thank you. Welcome, Commissioner.
No, come back.
Good morning, Chair Sheldon. How's everybody doing today? Nice to be back. Just want to quickly thank you for the chance to chat more about this, and also just recognize I'm not with you in the room today. I'm doing you the favor of sparing you the little whatever thing that I am fighting off. And I imagine there's plenty of that in the building as well, but I figured that would be the right thing to do. For the record, Neil Kamen, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Environmental Conservation. So I've been listening to the testimony. It's been very interesting and very valuable. I'm here today with my good colleague, Kevin Burke. I'm going to go first, but then Kevin and I will be available to answer questions together. Just have a few things I want to touch on. And I kind of want to start by just saying that, the department does take this work very seriously. It is a big undertaking to implement the Lake Champlain TMDLs. And it is a big undertaking to ask citizens to undertake retrofits, repairs to their property's stormwater. I also want to recognize that when we came to you a couple of weeks ago and talked to you about the outreach we've done in stormwater, we've done a fair bit. We communicated quite a bit with the towns in the 2019s to 2020, 2021 space, and then began to communicate with landowners more actively and directly, and in particular, as soon as our American Rescue Plan Act funding programs were available. So we wanted to make sure that residents had access to those funds to help at least get those permits in place and understand what would need to be done to construct. And so that explains why we have very heartfelt testimony coming to you today from the good folks in Richmond. Or Mr. Houston from Virgins or other areas. There's a lot of dialogue about this. There's a lot of energy, and this is a big program to undertake. And to Ms. Kalita, I just want to make mention of, I recognize what you heard at that meeting, and we take that to heart. So as I kind of get on with my comments, I also just want to note that both the General Assembly, you all, but also the Federal Environmental Protection Agency have vested into the state a lot of sort of regulatory authority and a lot of responsibility to comply with our TMDL requirements. And we do try and do this as equitably and as transparently as possible. And that includes the communications we've done and yet to do. But, it's hard to get to everybody in the way that they're able to receive the messaging all at once. So the first thing I want to absolutely emphasize for you all is that the 3-acre retrofit requirement, while it is a difficult one to be getting on with, is also really quite critical to the Lake Champlain TMDL. I've got just some numbers here. So the way the TMDLs are structured is you've got your developed lands allocations and your wastewater allocations, and then you've got your non-regulatory clean water projects. So for the developed lands, just some percentages from smallest to largest, the Missisquoi Basin, the 3-acre permit only is going to capture about 3% of the total developed land allocation. Lamoille River, 9%, Winooski River, 13%, Otter Creek, 15%, and the North Lake Direct, which are the smaller watersheds up and down from, say, Shelburne north up to St. Albans, 34%. So these are real percentages of the required reductions that EPA is holding us to so that we can make our water quality goals. And we recognize the difficulty that some of our residents are facing. And so that's why this is a really good discussion right now. I mentioned to you all, we've provided a lot of assistance already to certain sectors of the 3-acre retrofit regulated folks. So all 4 of the agricultural fairs, 9 public-private partnership projects, 28 manufactured housing communities, 68 schools, and 183 individual owners do have state financial support on this, but that's not everybody. So, and as the construction deadlines begin to emerge on the horizon, folks are reasonably getting concerned. So looking forward here, I just want to communicate to this committee, I've been working with a number of stakeholders, including a number of good people that are standing around the side of the room with you all right now and others, to look at options around how to help owners comply with this. There's a bill, it's S-24, sponsored by Senator Chittenden. I believe it's going to start to see some activity in the Senate committees before too long. What that bill generally would do would be to provide a little bit more time for residents to be able to comply. But it would also look to create a way to facilitate what Tom DePietro was just describing around towns, helping their private sites take on some of the stormwater requirements. You know, the situation in Richmond is a very interesting one, for sure. And I know that the town of Richmond is helping as they can. So we want to try and use the S-24 discussion space to see what are some other mechanisms that can be brought to bear to make that easier and to alleviate some of the liability questions, Chair Sheldon, that you just asked about. And lastly, the bill also contains some financial opportunities and incentives, a creation of prospectively either a revolving loan fund or a grant fund for municipalities that do take on private sites, and some mechanisms to pay for that. So I'm very much looking forward to getting into that dialogue around that specific bill. This is a great opportunity to kickstart that conversation, you know, without having to provide a position of support or anything like that on the bill. So I'm going to stop there and maybe introduce my good colleague, Kevin Burke. Chair, if it's okay, if Kevin makes any prefacing remarks he has before we take questions.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you for your testimony.
Morning, Chair Sheldon. Good morning, committee. Thanks for having us here today to provide more feedback on the stormwater. On the record, I'm Kevin Burke, Stormwater Program Manager. I've worked in the stormwater program in the department for close to 17 years, 18 years. So I have a good background on our TMDLs, our implementation, our monitoring, and a lot of the work the Watershed Management Division does to achieve our mission. I'm familiar with many of these sites, including the one in Richmond, including the one in Virgins. I know they're challenging. And there are a lot of folks that have come in and complied and successfully navigated these new requirements with our assistance and some without. So I think there is the opportunity for the folks that have not come in to find ways to comply with the new requirements and meet our TMDL goals. But clearly there's maybe some need for help in doing that. So I think that's why we're here and Neil's here to find those avenues to better assist going forward. But I'm here to answer, any of the regulatory questions that Tom touched upon. Thank you, Tom. I did want to clarify, you had asked about the half-acre threshold. That is in place today, but it's really focused on new development and redevelopment. So it doesn't necessarily apply to the 3-acre sites unless there's some other activity going on.
No, I just wanted people to be aware of the fact that, so there's been questions about why 3 acres and then the evolution of our stormwater regulatory permitting process. So maybe just if you could sketch that out for the committee and help us understand the timelines and how it is we're trying to, we're trying to be as fair as we can be while addressing the real water quality problems that we have.
Yeah, in terms of, I guess I can start with the 3-acre number. First, I think it's important to identify that, there's lots of different sectors as part of the TMDL, as Neil touched upon, from in-stream erosion and rivers, obviously agriculture, forestry, and developed lands. And in order to achieve that overall reduction in phosphorus, the budget for Lake Champlain, developed lands, we needed to reduce by such and such amount. To achieve that amount, we could have, say, gone to 4-acre sites. Sites with 4 acres of impervious, then we'd be talking about the 4-acre rule, perhaps. That was kind of, after identifying the impervious surface through GIS and, applying some conservative values as to what known, amount of phosphorus comes off of impervious surfaces. That was determined to be too high of a number. We'd pull in, or too low of a number rather. So bringing that down to 3 acres seemed to be the number that would get to that reduction that was needed from developed lands. Whereas if we don't meet it with 3 acres, EPA could perhaps work with us and say, hey, you need to do more, you're not meeting your goal. We're gonna regulate 2-acre sites now, but we're not. There are a lot of sites that are old standards, pre-2002, that have active permits in these watersheds. And if they're 2.8 acres of impervious, they are not required to upgrade, because we've determined that if the 3-acre sites come into compliance with these newer standards, we would be able to meet our developed lands reduction of phosphorus. And there are some other sites that do need to come in and retrofit, and that's really focused, whether 3 acres or under 3 acres, and that's really focused on some of the stormwater impaired streams, Chittenden County, Franklin County, some of our mountain watersheds in Killington and Sugarbush. So those are also some sites that will have to retrofit outside of 3 acre. That's kind of where we landed with the 3 acre number. I know it's a round number, 3.0. A lot of folks like to find ways to, how can we get to 2.9? And that's legitimate. If there's a site that's right at 3 acres and they want to remove some impervious surface to get outside that regulatory threshold, they certainly can. They might need to continue to maintain their existing stormwater permit if they have one, but they wouldn't need to retrofit.
Members have questions? Representative Ted via the north.
I think I heard in testimony that some of the solutions would include settlement ponds or catch ponds. How will the permitting for the catch ponds and settlement ponds differ from recreation ponds? Will there be permitting, or is it just dig a hole, make sure you plant grass ways around it, and there won't be any permitting just to make sure you have stormwater? Because I've heard nightmares about people trying to get permits for recreation ponds because of endangered species. Are we deciding to eliminate those because we want to stop stormwater for certain exceptions?
I think recreational ponds is a different topic in a sense, but I gather what you're saying. I think recreational ponds are often proposed in areas that are the low point on a property. And, I'm familiar with enough with some of the wetlands regulations that, often they might overlap with a mapped wetland or unmapped wetland, and might not be permitted. The stormwater program doesn't regulate the construction of recreational ponds. If a 3 acre site, for example, found that the most feasible option to provide the treatment and meet the new standards was to build, let's say they had soils they couldn't infiltrate. It couldn't quite fit the gravel wetland, but they have an existing old detention pond. Maybe it was dry at the time or something along those lines, and they want to retrofit that. That pond would be either constructed new or retrofitted to have some design elements that are found in the stormwater manual. A pretreatment forebay, which is kind of like a small settling pond before the pond, so that sediment can easily be removed. It would have certain side slopes, certain permanent pool depth. The outlet control structure would be sized appropriately to release the water over a certain period of time, generally 24 hours. So there are design specifications that are specific to stormwater treatment and control that you wouldn't find with a recreational pond.
Do you foresee ways to adapt the idea of a recreation pond to stormwater and vice versa to encourage more stormwater ponds?
That's a tough question. I think, I would think that, if somebody was to build a recreational pond, they would have a certain design in mind. and not to make it look more like infrastructure. That's kind of I don't know if that's where you're going.
There's a way that we could kind of camouflage a stormwater retention pond and make it look more like a recreation pond.
Well, there are. I think there's we have a great engineering community here in Vermont that have been doing stormwater work for a long time. And I have seen some really amazing designs where they've, constructed wetlands and different things that really are aesthetically pleasing. I think, sometimes that's added cost to have, one of those design engineers or landscape architect involved to really make these more than they need to be. So it's always nice to see that.
Thank you.
And then there are the beavers who engineer beautiful ponds for us. Representative Nora.
Yeah, I got a series of a numbers related question. First of all, nice to meet you, Ms. Burke, and we've spoken on the phone,
Yes.
so we could meet face to face. So how much phosphorus are we expecting to reduce using this 3 acre in total across Vermont? I know it's just a fraction of the overall developed land, but what is allocated specifically to be reduced by the 3 acre rule?
I'd have to,
Neil
probably has that number in front of him.
Yep, I do. It's 1.7 metric tons.
So 1.7 MT, all right? And how much of that has been accomplished thus far in our remediation of these 3 acre sites?
So not very much. And the reason for that is the way the permit program is structured, and Kevin can give more details. Folks have to apply for permit coverage, and then they have 5 years to build the projects after that. So we're in that period now where people are applying for, and once they obtain their permit, they have time to build the project. So I can't tell you what the total number is, but honestly, not very many projects have constructed yet. Let me, if you give me a quick moment, and Kevin, if you want to fill in any gaps for me, I can take a look at some resources I have at hand here.
Yeah, I think Neil hit the nail on the head. I mean, essentially, folks are in the stage where they've obtained permit coverage. They've engaged with an engineer. In the cases where they've obtained the permit, they have an approved plan. We're going to build this or retrofit that. Different. And when the permit is issued, it establishes that they will implement that engineered plan within 5 years, which is the permit term. That's the time at which they would renew the permit. So we really, I can only think of probably a handful that have gone to construction.
Yep, I
Especially
can.
given the seasonal limitations, we have short construction seasons.
Okay, so given that not hardly any of it, or very, very little of it is actually completed, how much of it has at least been to the engineering stage so that we really have a good handle on the total cost of that aspect, construction aspect?
I would say, I mean, we can get some, I can certainly get some better specific numbers for you, but I would say close to half. And there's some, we have a lot of applications that also have come in and are engaged with an engineer, but they're working through a lot of the design specifics. So there's some, there's often some back and forth determining what's feasible. Because there are sites that really can't do anything. That's where impact fees kick in. But we're really trying to make sure that folks work closely with their engineer to get the design that they need that's appropriate for the site. But I'm happy to look into a little bit.
Yeah,
fine tune those numbers.
So, but if we just continue down this path, so we've got roughly half of the 1.7 million tons. Is it metric tons or million tons?
Metric.
Just single, okay, not million metric tons, just metric tons, 1.7 metric tons. So we got about half of that at least engineered.
I wouldn't say engineered. I would say that, they've come in the door to some regard of trying to comply. And that could be, the permit process was actually set up in a two-step process. There was an initial NOI, and that was for these sites to come in. They would engage an engineer, but they would basically just confirm the amount of impervious. So for example, we might have seen through aerial imagery, they had 3.7. The engineer would fine tune that and basically submit a map, submit the NOI. Then they would be issued a permit for 18 months. And then at that time they get the permit, they have to come back in with a new NOI at that 18-month period with the full engineering. So we have a lot of sites that are kind of at different stages.
I'm just trying to figure out what percentage of that 1.7 metric tons do we feel like we've got a pretty good handle on, and we know how much it's gonna cost to build the remediation for that, whatever that percentage is. It's only 10% thus far. Got a handle on, but what is that
That's fully engineered.
it's fully, man, we've got a good
Shovel ready.
handle on the cost of how much it's gonna cost to remediate that.
We don't, the application, I should note, doesn't necessarily, if we've approved an engineering design, it doesn't necessarily come in and say, this is how much it's going to cost us to build it. We certainly hear that
Okay.
from folks.
My next question is, okay, so given that percentage,
Looks like Deputy Commissioner has a comment to make.
Thanks. So Representative North, I just wanted to offer a couple of quick additional numeric answers to your question, since
right,
I've got a command station here so I can pull at resources, right? We have, among the 3-acre permits that have gone through permitting, we have 9 of those sites that have completed their construction and have notified the stormwater program that they've done so.
okay,
With regard to the costs, an engineering feasibility analysis may have an engineer's opinion of probable cost. The true cost comes clear when you do the bidding. I have mentioned a couple times the Green Schools program, and we are looking at a very substantial book of bids coming in for the Green Schools program during this winter, leading up to construction this spring. So we're going to have a pretty nice body of additional evidence to fine tune what some of the generalized costs are going to be. Site by site, it is still going to depend on the specific practice. As Kevin notes, there are many, and the conditions of the site, the size of it, and availability of contractors. So, yeah.
okay.
I also, if I could, as well, sir, the Clean Water Initiative program folks, my colleague Emily Bird and Claire Madden will have appeared in front of your committee a couple times, and they submitted the Clean Water Performance Report. There's an appendix in that has some really good data on the overall achievement of stormwater reduction. I think it's Appendix F, and there's some good numbers in that report. That's not 3-acre, that's stormwater generally, regulated stormwater and its overall contribution. But it's useful, it's helpful.
You can probably tell where I'm going with this. I'm trying to drive to what is it cost per kilogram of phosphorus to meet the TMDL in this method. And by the method, I mean by the 3-acre rule method. What's the cost per house, and what's the cost per acre, and what's the cost per kilogram of removed phosphorus using the 3-acre rule methods that we're applying? That's what I'm driving at, and you may not be able to answer those questions now.
So what I would do is, if Kevin wants to fill in any gaps for me, I could go dig into that performance report. There's a figure that I like to look at every year as the new data comes out. And it's the cost efficiency for practices, for stormwater practices, for roads, for agriculture. So your 3-acre, because it's retrofit and because it is constrained, on a per kilogram basis, you're going to have higher costs per kilo. Right. I mean, that makes sense because you're dealing with constrained pre-developed sites. So if I look at that figure and look at that bar, I'm going to be looking at maybe the upper 75th percentile of that or something as a general number. So now I can go dig that up if you'd like.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Representative Logan.
Yeah, I guess following up on that question, then I think it would be helpful for us to review what percentage contribution impervious surface makes to the total.
Yeah.
That we're trying to abate.
Yeah, it's 1.7 divided by the total TMDL, which is like 213. So it's like 0.5% at best.
So, Deputy Commissioner, you started your testimony with percentages of the 3-acre contributions to the different segments or different water bodies, and you said the North Lake was 34%. Can you remind us
of the managed developed lands. So
all managed development lands?
Just of the little slice of pie. according to the developments. Yeah.
Oh, I see. 34% of just this, of just the already, of the impervious land.
So the reduction requirements that we would intend to get from the 3 acre program, from the general sort of industrial stormwater, multi-sector general permit, from the transportation, and from MS4s. So those 4 would give you the percentages that I gave you. We actually filed testimony last year, or responses last year on this, which is why I've got the numbers right in front of me. So I'm happy to actually resubmit the memo, the Q&A on that, maybe updated a little bit, but it's good information.
Great. We welcome that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are you finished?
If I may, Representative North,
Yes, please.
let's talk about around 10 to 20 K per kilo. So I'm looking at the high end of the stormwater. This is it's figure 21 in the Clean Water Performance Report. Again, I know you have that in your body of materials, so I won't plug up your inbox with it again, but.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Can I make a comment?
You may. Can you just say for the record again who you are?
Sure, my name's Paige Kalita. I live in Richmond in a 3 acre site. If I just want to say, if I'm going to have to spend $10,000 or $20,000 of my own money, I really would want it to go to something that makes an impact. I've looked at a lot of this data, to try to understand it. I have no experience in this, but I think what you're all kind of getting at is what bang for a buck does this give us? And if $10,000 can reduce more in some other application, I guess sign me up. Like I would rather like meet the goal in a better way if I have to spend money.
Deputy Commissioner, could you hear that?
I did, yes. Would you like a reaction?
If you have one.
I did. I do, and I don't want it to come across poorly. I absolutely appreciate what you're saying. And if we rewind back to 2016, when the law was passed that establishes the 3 acre permit program, the concept there was it was an all-in approach, meaning all sectors are contributing. And so, while it is a smaller proportion of the total that we do need to get those nutrient reductions somewhere. And so if we don't get them from the stormwater 3 acre space, they'll need to come from another sector, which is also already kind of pulling ores as well. True that they may be more cost efficient, but the state does have to get the nutrient reductions as we can.
Representative Tagliavia, then Pritchard.
You mentioned it, excuse me, this was first implemented or enacted in 2016. Is that correct?
That's when Act 64 was signed. Yes, sir.
How soon after that act was any kind of education or information put out to the public at large regarding what was coming down the road?
I would honestly have to say beginning mid 2014, because Act 64, the Vermont Clean Water Act, was an instrument that was passed as a result of EPA redoing the TMDL for Lake Champlain and essentially substituting an older TMDL that the state, under the state's authority, had implemented, and instead implementing under their own authority. So Legislative Counsel O'Grady had spoken about that at his first, Water 101. So there was a lot of education, a lot of news, a lot of media done at that time over the general components of Act 64. So the new road stormwater requirements, 3 acre requirements, MS4 requirements, the state's transportation TS4 requirements, agriculture, all of the sectors. And then the way the act was structured is it gave Kevin and his team the authority, but also the time to develop the 3-acre general permit and the new practices, the stormwater manual. Kevin, nod yes if I'm on the right track here. And then from there, once the general permit was promulgated, began the education specifically to 3-acre owners. But it takes, it takes a lot to reach 650,000 citizens, obviously. So it is very fair that we're here today, and in no way does the department shy away from the conversation or engagement with the good folks in the room.
Yes.
Paige Cleta from Richmond. I read news. This is not something I've ever been interested in. I'd just like to point out the first time I was notified was with a letter in August 21st of 2024. First time I learned about that I was in a 3-acre site.
Representative Moore.
Quick question for Paige, actually. So Paige, in the neighborhoods above or near your neighborhood that were, I guess, permitted after the 2002, built after 2002, so permitted after that, is there any obvious, visible stormwater management, ponds, retention practices anywhere in those areas?
So, the Southview neighborhood, only part of it is in the 3-acre. The newer part of it does not have a stormwater permit. So that is sort of reverse of what I'm hearing should have happened. Like as rules got stricter in stormwater, it seems like that area should have one. I don't know why they don't.
Can I just clarify, that's the upstream of you?
Upstream of me, yes. Southview Road, so part of Southview Road. Then there's a new development, Bradford Terrace, which was built within the last 10 years. They have a current system. The road goes uphill and there's a settling pond at the top of the hill. So I'd say probably about 3 or 4 homes, the water flows into, maybe flows into that. The rest of the water from that section flows to me. And that settling pond is dry. There's no water in it. And it's uphill. It's like at the top of the hill. So, but that's where they put it. I don't really know other than visually what I see.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Pritchard.
So I just want to make sure I understand this clearly. To me, it seems like the requirements you are trying to achieve, the reductions, are on the backs of the 700 folks that are on this list. Not 660,000 Vermonters, but the 700 people that are on this list. And I want to make sure I understand this clearly, because I have a great concern for this. I have folks in my district that are on this list. And I got to tell you, what they're asked to come up with to comply is ridiculous. It's going to put them out of business. It has a large effect. For example, I'll give you an example. We've set aside $4 million for 4 fairs. To meet compliance, the Rutland Fair is going to have to spend $3.8 million, or $2 million we set aside. It's going to cost them $3.8 million. They don't even have the money to do the engineering study. Here's a fair that's been in this state for 179 years that's going to be out of business. I get the intent of what we're trying to do to meet and reduce phosphorus. But we put that, we lost something when we got to this 3-acre thing, because we are harming people. We are harming people in this state to achieve that. And I for one, am just totally against it. It's, fix it, but it's broken, and it's broken badly. And I really don't understand these impact fees. I mean, some of the impact fees for these people on the list are going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It makes no sense to me. And so they pay the fine or they pay the impact fee, what becomes of reaching that goal for the reduction? And I guess I'm not understanding this clearly.
Yeah, let's let them have a chance to respond to your point.
Can speak.
Deputy
Or you want to speak, Neil?
I just want to make note that, I heard some cost figures thrown, tossed out for Rutland there. I'm not sure the engineering has been completed for the Rutland State Fair. I believe they just began to engage with the funding that was provided to them either through our department or through the Agency of Agriculture for this. So I think that let's wait and see what those actual numbers look like before that. But to your point, stormwater retrofits do cost money. So.
Did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to, I'd agree with Neil that, very familiar with the Rutland Fair, and I think we've had a lot of numbers thrown around prior to them engaging with an engineer. They are now engaged with an engineer, very qualified engineer, Edmund Kesselring. And
very good.
They need to be able to do the engineering to really identify what can be done, can't be done, and then that would generate sort of an estimated cost. And in terms of, engineering costs, there is some money that they've got available to contribute to that, but as I understand, they need more. But I'm certainly interested in getting into the weeds a little bit with the engineer just to better understand, and I know some of our staff probably have, better understand, where they think things are headed, what they can do, what they can't do, what the site looks like in terms of feasibility. So I think to Neil's Deputy Commissioner's point, there's really a need to sort of get through the engineering to fine tune what that costs.
But how about the folks that have got through the engineering? And they're still, doesn't change the reality of the costs that they have.
No, it's a substantial cost.
It's a ridiculous cost. It's a ridiculous cost for these people to bear.
So
And if you're not one of those 700 people, I think it's hard to understand that.
we need to begin to wind this conversation down. I see Deputy Commissioner has his hand up and Representative Tagliavia also, but we do need to move on.
I'll hold off for now. Representative, go ahead, please.
I just wanted the record to reflect that I echo Representative Pritchard's sentiments.
Representative North.
I had a.
Oh, sorry, I forgot Bartholomew. Go ahead, Representative Bartholomew.
I just, it seems inherently unfair that only some of the property owners that contribute the stormwater are being asked to pay. So how do we fix that? It seems just an obvious problem. Is there a solution?
Maybe I can hop in with my original point and then capitalize on that, Representative, that some of these difficult conversations like we're having right now, the room's a little warm, right? And that's quite all right. It goes all the way back to 2016 and then 2019, when then Treasurer Pierce was leading discussions around how to pay for clean water in Vermont. And it was recognized that, the state would contribute some proportion and that the citizens would contribute an additional proportion. And, the idea, Representative, that you're raising is either some sort of a statewide mechanism that would help the owners out, or a municipal mechanism that would pass those, those costs perhaps to the grand list, or if more targeted to a special assessment district kind of thing. And that's the kind of mechanism that we hope to talk about as part of that S24 is see what some of the other funding mechanisms specific for the 3-acre needs would be. But what you all are raising, representatives, is a big discussion that has transpired over the course of time. And it's coming back now because, these regulations are now landing. So we welcome the conversation.
A legislative fix as opposed to an agency fix.
Absolutely. Right. That's what that is. So, and that's why we're here today. And so this is the beginning of the conversation. And I thank you all for participating in it. All right, we do need to move on. Representative Nor.
are you staffed appropriately to deal with this? How many FTEs do we have in the people that deal with the 3 acre rule within the EDC?
Kevin, I'll let you take that one, please.
We've got quite a program. Got 5 or 6 of us that strictly deal with operational permitting, so impervious surfaces. And that includes new development, redevelopment. They're also dealing with the 3 acre stuff, which is, it's been challenging. I wouldn't say otherwise. And they've been really good at trying to work with folks on getting them on board. Thank you.
All right, thank you all again. And with that, we will take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good day. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.